The next session, different, very different, I would say, from our discussions, but it's still about being humanitarian. It is artificial intelligence embracing our humanity to maximize machines. I'm absolutely fascinated. I don't know which direction this conversation is going to go, but we are in the capable hands of Kashyap Kompella, who also wears many hats. He is CEO RPAZ AI, a global technology industry analyst firm. He is a best-selling author, a columnist, a visiting faculty at many prestigious institutions, and committed to democratizing AI education. He is going to be in conversation with John Havens, a sustainability expert and the author of this book. I am completely fascinated, but also completely clueless about what this conversation could lead to. So I'm going to leave it into the capable hands of Kashyap and John to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Meena. And it's my great pleasure to be hosting my dear friend, John Havens, today. So the topic for our, welcome, John. The topic for our session today is embracing the man-machine tango. And so let me just set a bit of context for this before I introduce John. So artificial intelligence is already here everywhere, but it's still early days for artificial intelligence. Even it's early days, but AI is getting better and better. And so we worry for our and our children's future and jobs. Another angle to this is, while we're excited by the wonderful possibilities of AI, we're also worried about its dark side. So if you look at the state of the world today, let's face it, I mean, we have made a lot of progress as humanity in recent decades, but the world is still an unjust and unequal place. And when we use AI for automation, are we codifying the current status quo? So there is lots to unpack, and there is nobody better to discuss these issues than John Havens. So John is like author of 3 books, at least, that I'm aware of. But most recently, he's been the author of Artificial Intelligence. But to call John an author is to sort of do a lot of injustice to him, because John wears multiple hats. So he's a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Human Rights and Technology. He's the founder and executive director of the Council on Extended Intelligence, which is a partnership between IEEE and the MIT Media Lab. And currently, he's a sustainability practice lead at IEEE Standards Association. But where I know John from, and where the world knows John at this point in time, I think, is as the executive director of IEEE's global initiative on the ethics of AI, ethics of autonomous and intelligent systems. So in that role, John has orchestrated like nearly 2,000 experts, I think, across different fields across the globe, in creating sort of a moral code or an ethical code for artificial intelligence. So John is like battling on different fronts and is literally saving the world from the demons of artificial intelligence. So welcome, John. So let's, we only have limited amount of time. So I want to start by asking you about your book. So in your book, Artificial Intelligence, you outline 2 scenarios: a robotic dystopia, or a more hopeful scenario where humans use AI to enhance our natural talents and become a better species. So please flesh out these scenarios, and where is our current trajectory? Are we on the right path?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Kashyap, or Cash, as I call you, for the invite. So appreciate all the work that you graciously do with all the different IEEE work that I do, which is my day job, which I could talk about more. And thanks for the invitation to the BizLit Fest. I'm just waking up. The reason I wanted to project 2 scenarios is that it's pretty easy to fall into fear with regards to artificial intelligence and technology in general. However, a lot of times the fears in media are very overt. You know, a machine will kill us. Like, okay. For me, I thought that it's not just that it was kind of boring because it's been done so much, but it wasn't what I think most of us tend to be most scared about, which is self-reflection. Machines and algorithms can be amazing tools, and artificial intelligence is a very broad field, machine learning, deep learning, etc. But really, I wanted to show the benefit, and that's why the subtitle is Embracing Our Humanity to Maximize Machines. Using tools to help self-reflection, wonderful. Avoiding the self-reflection, that's where the fear will really be escalated, and that's the main dystopia that I'm trying to advise against.
Right. So let's, step back a little bit. Let's start with the basics. Like a lot of the people I talk to, they say, hey, AI is just a bunch of code. It's a piece of software. So what does it really mean for machines or AI or algorithms to have ethics or ethical values?
Great question. The short answer is I believe, and I think the science shows, machines, algorithms, artificial intelligence, robots, there is no sentient machine as of today that I know of from the experts who would say that. Now, that said, there's a term called anthropomorphism, which I know you know, which is if someone wants to believe that something is real, then they can. There's also an idea of what's called animism, or in Japan, something called the Shinto tradition. So I want to be clear here. And in the book, I point this out. I don't want to judge people where they believe something. But that said, there's a lot of discussions about the idea of robot rights. And what normally is always left out of the conversation, and this was my previous book, is the personal data. It's essential to remember that any machine that tracks humans to learn how humans function or think, and then using that to create the algorithms that would help humans, it means that automatically they're tracking our data. By and large, globally, human data is tracked and owned in ways that people in India, the United States, all around the world, they don't have full, genuine consent to access their own data. So this is a critical discussion, is that talking about machine rights or robot rights, those conversations 95% of the time don't mention tracking human data. So this object in my hand, this iPhone, does not operate in isolation. It's not like all of a sudden, oh, this pen has become sentient. This is Bob the pen. And I'm not trying to mock anyone's beliefs. The point is that we have to remember that human rights and ecosystem planetary rights are critical to protect now. And if we weren't, let's say, sentient, and I point this out in the book, let's say sentient beings are going to come from machines or algorithms. Think of how upset they would be if they found out that they were essentially born using data, right, that was completely harvested from people without their permission. They'll be mad. So I just want to make sure to point that out. That's the easier thing to focus on, is protect humans' rights, protect ecosystem rights, rivers, etc. Because the intellectual property of the companies creating the machines is vast, and they have millions and billions of dollars legally to protect their intellectual property, protect the humans and the planet now, make the machines better down the road.
That's an interesting thread, John. You said like the people or the organizations that are building these machines, they have like billions and billions of dollars or millions and millions of dollars to protect their IP. So you're sort of painting the picture that the common public, who is on their side, who is looking after their interests, because we're not aware of it, like you said, like where our data is going, where is it being used, are we headed in the right direction, what can we do?
We're not headed in the right direction, by and large. The GDPR, and I'll speak mainly in the United States about stuff I know in Europe. The GDPR about 7 or 8 years ago, when it came out, I literally in my living room jumped up and yelled in happiness, because mainly what it was doing was making people aware of the communication that has to happen around our data. In the United States, at least, and I think it's pervasive in most media, there's this sense that our data is not really worth much. There's all these messages. Well, people, consumers, and I don't like that term in general, will not be defined solely as a consumer. I do not live only to purchase. But consumers or citizens or people, they don't care about their data. They're just going to check the privacy things and move on. That's not an answer. That's what happens. But people do care about their data. They just have been trained to think they don't. And first of all, it's a multiple billion, if not trillion dollar industry, meaning the advertising industry, where our data is tracked. So the fact that our data is worthless is empirically untrue. People pay a lot for our data as it's sorted on third-party data lists, and the whole advertising industry to track us, which, by the way, is not a bad thing. I'm not trying to say that it's evil. The point is that to protect that business model, there's this myth that letting people have access and portability to their data might hurt profits. And by the way, maybe it would, but that's immaterial to me. It's bad business. It's immoral to keep people from their data. Health data is where, especially in the United States, it's actually even deadly. And more importantly, let's make it positive. Not having portability for your data, it sounds kind of boring. But if I go to one doctor and they give me back this stack of paper about my cancer treatment, in the United States, in general, I still carry all these pieces of paper to my next doctor's appointment. That means literally the time to go through all this stuff. I don't talk to my doctor. I don't look at them face to face. And all this data I may get wrong because I'm not a doctor. Putting all these things into a tool and an app where I can have portability of the data means I pay my health insurance providers more accurately, means my doctors have information, and literally people's lives get saved. So it's 2022, right? When we have conversations, I don't mean this one, but when people are like, let's give robots rights, and when do they get sentient? And humans still go from hospital to hospital taking badly printed faxes in 2022, the answer is the business model needs to change. And then AI and all the machines that use the data can have better data to build better machines.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think you call out a need for course correction. So we'll come to that course correction solutions in a bit. But you touched upon something, the business models. Like as I look around, there is a lot of personalization algorithms, which they're everywhere in the content we consume, in the movies we see, in the music we do, and the recommendations that we get. So there is a lot of data that the organizations that are building these multi-trillion-dollar algorithms, they have. So in that sense, are you think that we're losing a bit of our humanity as these corporations chase profits and productivity?
Yes. And what's unfortunate in my experience and professional expertise, having written a lot about positive psychology, my dad was a psychiatrist. He passed away in 2011. My mom is a minister in a Christian tradition. There's this, I think, again, I'll speak mainly of the United States. While there's a lot of literature about understanding yourself, etc., that's not what the main purpose is for what's online. I'm being very general, but to make the point, as a rule, the information that we're given is to sort of test, hey, what do you want to buy? Right? It's all about purchase versus purpose in general with these algorithms. Because I used to work at a big PR firm. And again, there's nothing wrong with finding out what people want to buy and helping them buy what they like. And training those algorithms is an amazing tool. Like I say this all the time, I'm never probably going to read a horror book. So I don't want to get offered a horror book on Amazon, but I do want to read a thriller. Now that nuance where people go, really, it's just a book. There's this idea I wrote about in one of my books, which a wonderful guy named it's Eli Parisier. I always forget his first name. This idea about an echo chamber, where the reason that it's so valuable to live a life where you're going to meet people who don't believe the things that you do is that you get to test your own values. If you kind of click and, I don't want a horror book within, now algorithms are so nuanced. I don't know how long it takes to train to kind of get to know a person in general, but I think it's probably months, days to sort of know this person's never going to buy this. Well, then give them more ads for that. And so then you kind of find this repetitive aspect to your life where you never get out of, the stuff that you originally clicked on. Being very simplistic, and algorithms are so nuanced that you probably won't live only in that isolation. But the point is that there's not this sense of inherent worth for people outside of what you buy. And there's non-Western traditions, certainly the Ubuntu ethics that comes largely from Africa. This is English translation that says, I am because we are. And in the United States and around the world, whether it's a faith-based tradition or a community organization like Kiwanis Club or what have you, if you are in a community that says you have worth, no matter how much money you make or the job that you have, the entire sort of aspect of who we are and the algorithms that drive our life, as it were, literal algorithms, or just how we choose to live our lives, becomes completely different. Because then we aren't, everything that we're doing is not about us getting tracked by these forces that are mainly, usually manipulating us to buy.
Makes sense. I think this notion of echo chambers is like very powerful, because the algorithms define your reality, and then you become like locked into those echo chambers and never really sort of get out of it. But I mean, this has become a little dark. So let's talk about some hope and positive things. What are some examples of responsible AI or ethical AI that you can offer and say these are good examples? These are some things that we should emulate. And before you that, I mean, here is a request to the audiences. So I'm keeping an eye on any questions that you will ask. So please put them into the chat box. John.
Well, first of all, I want to say I chose this mug specifically because my daughter made this, and she's a wonderful artist. She's now 17, but she made this years ago. And I'm really glad you brought up the positive side. First of all, everything I've talked about, the request, the urgent need is to simply use the same tools that exist for advertising, and I call that purchase, for purpose. And when people are allowed access to their data and portability, in general, most of the companies making tools, I use Google Docs every day. I use Gmail. Those don't change. It's how we might pay for them versus paying, through ads, et cetera, that can change. So the business model shifting doesn't mean that people who work so hard to make these amazing algorithms don't get paid. It just means that there's this opportunity to kind of, if you've seen The Wizard of Oz, pull back the curtain and let us all have more of a invitation to really look at our own lives. It's a kind of a statement on modernity that we don't maybe have the same traditions in 2022. I think globally, because I don't want to say everyone in India does this. India is a big place, right? Same with the US. But some positive uses of artificial intelligence. One that I think is most remarkable is with soldiers returning from war, especially in Afghanistan. I wrote about this in the book, I think. There's this need, apparently, and I greatly honor soldiers in any part of the world, although I'm very much anti-war. But for those who protect us, I deeply appreciate what they do. And coming back from those violent situations where PTSD is a big deal, using artificial intelligence chatbots, there's a lot of evidence showing that therapy can be greatly increased when someone knows that they're talking to a machine or an algorithm, but they kind of go to that place of anthropomorphism where they feel like they're talking to a person. But apparently the soldiers can kind of get out this most horrible stuff that apparently a lot of times they feel embarrassed or ashamed to talk about to a person. And here I think this is a fabulous example of when the machine and the human can be so useful, is that someone can say, almost like going to a Catholic confessional or what have you, they can get the stuff out therapeutically they need to. However, the next step for these soldiers is then to talk to a human therapist where they know they're talking to a human. So I bring this up because there's such a need for mental health resources around the world. And mental health is now at a pandemic level, meaning negative mental health. These types of tools are fantastic. Similarly, in Japan, where robots, the actual morphology or how they look is a big deal, the culture, whether it's through gaming or just in general, or animism, robots, especially as companions, apparently culturally are much more accepted than in the United States and other places. And I have a chapter of this in my book where I have a fictional vignette where my son comes in the room and we talk. And I wrote about myself being like 75 and in a senior assisted living home. And I'm talking with my son and then realize he's a robot copy of my son. And in the vignette, I get very upset. Like, why did my son send his copy? And the robot's like, hey, don't blame the messenger. Your son told me to come. And I wrote that because as the robot leaves and is sort of like, okay, I get it. I tell the robot, hey, make sure to come back and visit me next week. Now, I say that because for me personally, if I was going to be alone the rest of my life and I only had a copy of my son or a copy of someone to talk to, I probably would want that. And so that's what I bring up some other good examples of. Companion robots are offering some wonderful assistance because people will talk to them in ways they won't talk to a machine.
So that's very interesting, John, because when we think about the future of jobs, what robots will do, what humans will do better, etc. So the one thing that stands out as uniquely human is this empathy. But the kind of things that you describe are really situations where we're using robots as caregivers, as robots empathizing or doing counseling therapy, etc. So that's an interesting nuance that hadn't occurred to me, that it's not just like humans you need to work in those scenarios. So we're sort of running out of time, but I want to pick your brains on two things. One is there are two stakeholders, like we talked about the business model, the organizations, etc. But beyond that, there are two stakeholders. One is the people, the developers, the practitioners who are actually building the AI solutions for us, and the general public. And for the majority of the general public, it depends on country to country, but in general, the general public is hopeful towards AI. They may not exactly be aware of the dark side because the press really talks only about the positive innovations mostly, in my experience at least. So tell us about what are the tools that are available to practitioners to implement ethical AI or good AI for good, and what is it that general public can do to bring forth more AI for good applications?
A great question. I think, first of all, I know what you mean when you say, because of your expertise, AI for good. For the general public, remember that artificial intelligence can be a very simple machine learning tool, which is the equivalent of having like 10 people read through 1,000 documents and find every time the word horse is written, or deep learning, which is like a massive algorithm that sort of teaches its own the code to write its own algorithm and becomes what's called black box, where you don't really understand. The people that create it and write the algorithms won't necessarily understand all the outcomes, right? So this is not to be negative towards that mindset, but to remember there's dark, like someone creating a machine to do something negative or cause harm. And then there's also just what responsible means, which for me means if you build a machine or an algorithm and you're like, we're not really sure what it's going to do, then that's not responsible. Maybe if you tell someone, the person who buys it, we don't know the outcome. But so that whole kind of, I consider that a form of obfuscation, meaning developers saying, this is how cool this is, it's going to do X, Y, and Z, but we don't know about these other things. Then, keep testing. Like, I'm not saying don't do it, but that'd be like saying we're going to produce a car where we're pretty sure 90% of the time when you go over 60 miles an hour, you're safe, but the other 10% we're not sure. Well, you wouldn't get to sell it. There's this aspect of certain types of AI that it's just a young science, but there's so much media about it that a lot of, again, one thing I like about a lot of the practitioners who are most responsible is they're like, oh, hold on, we can talk about sentience, but let's just make sure we can have a machine look at 10 million pictures of people and then not say that people who have dark skin all of a sudden randomly look like a gorilla, because that's what a recent algorithm did. So brute force algorithms, etc. Anyway, back to your question. What the general public, I think, needs to do mainly is, and I say embracing our humanity to maximize machines, is recognize that there's this, kind of temptation. I certainly have it to automate aspects of our lives. Our calendar, for instance, it's hard to make decisions about your day. Okay. But my previous book, I also talked a lot about the quantified self movement, where you track all that you do. And I realized I should wind up. So I'll just say this. As we move forward with machines and AI, which are already doing so much to help people and the planet, it's a wonderful time for humanity, all of us, whatever our traditions are, to say, if I have worth and others have worth, machines are great, but and AI is great. But for AI for good, we have to define what good means for ourselves. Someone saying, hey, here's this machine that's for good. Well, how do you know it's for good? How do you know how to test your own values? And in the book, I talk a lot about positive psychiatry with tools like meditation, altruism, as you mentioned. There are things that as humans that also make us conscious. This is the big discussion: are machines conscious? Well, that's also about things like faith. And faith, there's formal faith traditions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity. And then there's, I call them faith-based traditions in the sense of where people get together and they all meditate together, even if they don't all worship Allah or Jesus. These things that right now we know make us inherently human, whether or not they can be replicated or whether or not someone believes that the machine is now a person. The one main message in the book is, let's not just give our humanity away or let it be taken from us, where it's not about someone doing something illegal or immoral, but that it's just easy to be like, I'll let the machine do that. We have a need, especially with kids. And I'll say this in my closing again, as a parent. All people, this is my personal belief, have worth. You're born, you have worth. Sadly, most people, because of our mental health crisis, are not told enough that they have worth. And getting ads for stuff, okay, momentary happiness, it's called hedonic happiness. I get it, that dopamine hit of buying something, that's cool, in its place. But that deeper sense of family, of tradition, of faith, that can make us human with that empathy, why would we ever trade that to give away completely? If someday we interact more deeply with machines in new ways and our data is safe, cool. But that's the point about embracing our humanity. We have worth. And the positive message I want to give is that we're worth taking the time to get to know who we are.
That's a very powerful message, John. And to say artificial, now I know what you mean, why you put artificial in the title. And by the way, that's a great title, because anybody who looks at artificial intelligence always goes, oh, wow, artificial intelligence. That's a title that makes people want to pick up the book. So thank you so much, John. And Meena, did you want to have any questions for John? Or
I don't see any on my screen. Do you, Kashyap?
yes, I have one question. This is about the jobs that machine will take, etc. So I want to sort of ask a broader question, because our topic is man-machine tango. So, render unto Caesars what Caesars, and render unto God what's God's. So what should be done by machines, and what should we be doing?
Oh, easy question to answer in 1 minute or so. It's a great question. First of all, in the current economic system, which I will put under GDP, meaning growth, and especially where shareholders legally, and this is pretty common around the world, companies have to make money for shareholders first. So this is not about companies doing anything wrong. The system that we're in globally largely supports a monetary and financial mentality that, first of all, only examines financial measures. GDP is largely financial metrics. And at least in the US and around the world, there is a tiny group of people. I'm sorry, this is globally a tiny group of people that own a majority of wealth. I think it's like, 50 people own more than half of the wealth of the entire planet, something like that. So to be clear, that is just what is. Like empirically, that's the system. I am speaking just as myself, not for my employer. I do not support that system. That system, in terms of jobs, and this is not me saying this, Martin Ford, an author I admire very much, have been saying this for years. in that system, and I believe this, there is no job that will not be automated by machines or robots, or in the metaverse, right? Physical robots, they're going to take a hit soon because it's a lot easier or less expensive to make an avatar in the metaverse or an extended reality than it is to build a physical robot. But remember, if someone can make something and the main priority is financial, there's no reason, none, that any job will not be lost. That sounds dark. It's just true. Period. Like I have not seen any country say, hold on, AI and robotics industry, stop making your stuff because it might replace a job. Nope. You'll hear that we want to have jobs for people so they can make money. Now, I'm reversing this now as a positive message to say, if the first metrics of success for society are, can we keep our planet safe? So for the next 40, 50, 100, 200 years, our people, all of them, have access to a safe and healthy planet. Then jobs, that question becomes wonderful because people getting hired for green jobs. There will be a cap when the priority is that people's well-being is prioritized. Then you either have to pay them through some kind of, wage or make sure they have enough food. And they also need purpose for a job that makes sense to them. So anyway, long answer, except to say, all jobs are going to be automated, period. I'm happy to have that argument with someone in the current system because no one's stopping them otherwise. So the wonderful opportunity there is to say, put the planet and people first, and then the profits will still come when those are accounted for first.
Thank you,
Fantastic.
John, for
Indeed.
putting the metaphysics in the metaverse. So thank you, and I hope you will come back next year and talk about the sustainability. So have a
Thank you again.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Kashyap. That was amazing. And surprisingly, I found it linked to the previous session because it's all about business being responsible towards society in some way or the other. So great.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.